if I say Steppenwolf Theater Company, you probably think of Chicago's rock and roll theater, John Malkovich, Gary Sinise, and the smash a beer can on your forehead school of acting. But what about the women of Steppenwolf? Welcome to a special one-hour edition of Women in Theater. I'm Linda Weiner, theater critic of Newsday, and our guests today are Martha Lavey, artistic director of Steppenwolf since 1995, along with Joan Allen and Lois Smith, two of the invaluable actresses who helped define the subtle sides of the Steppenwolf evolution through almost 30 amazing years. Can you believe that it's 30 years? Mm-hmm. I was there almost at the beginning. You were there 1 year from the beginning. Mm-hmm. Why don't we talk to Joan first at the very beginning, because really, 76 is when the legend begins in 1976, when a bunch of people from mostly Midwest colleges.
Yeah. Illinois State University.
The Illinois State University.
Yeah.
Which is in Normal, Illinois. It's a teacher's college, right?
Well, I don't know. I think it's. I didn't go there actually, so I wasn't part of that. But it's. I think they do have a lot of teachers that come out of that school.
Anyway, they started this company in the northern suburbs in a church in Highland Park, Illinois, which is not Chicago, which is way off loop Chicago, right?
Yes.
And for several years, nobody was even invited to come.
I think we didn't know anybody wanted to come at that point. I think the suburban critics came, but now once the Chicago critics were like, they're coming up here now. We were excited.
Now, you joined a year later?
Yeah, I went to college with John Malkovich at Eastern Illinois University, yet another state college. And I was a couple years younger. He, as a senior, transferred to Illinois State and met Terry Kinney and Laurie Metcalf and H.E. Backus and Jeff Perry, Moira Harris, you know, Al Wilder, all the people who started the original company. And they saw John and they were like, wow, we want him to be part of the company. And Gary Sinise, who was best friends with Jeff Perry, who did not go to Illinois State, grew up in Highland Park and got the theater going, and he would come and visit Jeff, and that's how they all got together. So they all graduated, came up to Highland Park to do their first work, and as a friend of John's, I came and visited, and then was asked to do a play like a year into the existence of the company. John said, you want to come and do a play, so.
And what was your first impression of the group?
Oh, it was unbelievable. I mean, I just thought they were the most talented people I'd ever seen in my life. They were the funniest. I thought Moira was just like the perfect Tennessee Williams heroine. I thought Laurie was like, you know, as good as Lucille Ball. I thought Jeff Perry was poignant and touching, and Gary was earthy, and Terry was, you know, I just thought, I had to pinch myself. I just couldn't believe the talent. It was, I felt so fortunate to be with all of them.
And was it hard for them to let you in? You know, you sort of missed the first chapter.
Yeah, so. I think, you know, there was a period of you know, like with any group, you know, I think they had known each other for a long time, and it just took a little while to find my legs, but you know, nothing out of the ordinary, I don't think.
But it's a real Chicago kind of story with this sort of organic companies being formed, not all of them lasting, of course, but the real close ensembles and intensity. And I don't know, how many marriages come out of that?
Oh, wow, a few.
Yeah, a bunch of marriages came out of that, a bunch of marriages broke out of there, right, broke after that. So, and my impression is that the group itself made the decisions, that this was sort of a collective decision thing.
Yes.
Can you remember?
Sometimes maddeningly so.
Can you remember the more maddening one?
Well, I mean, it was difficult. We'd have these lengthy meetings. We'd be doing all the work. We'd have to, you know, nobody was getting paid, and we were in this. It was the basement of a Catholic grade school, and the rent was something like $35 a month or something.
And Jeff Perry's mother was paying, I think.
And yeah, Kitty Perry was very generous, and Gary's parents gave a lot of money to it, and so, you know, we were just there doing everything, you know, creating the space, building the sets, you know, changing the sets, and acting in the plays and selling the tickets, yada yada yada. So that was a lot of work. So then when you'd have these really lengthy meetings making policy decisions, sometimes it's like, we want a dictator for a while.
Yeah.
We kind of evolved. We want somebody to tell us what to do. There can be too much democracy.
Yeah, I recall reading about manifestos and mission papers. And
yeah, well, there would be, you know, we had to have a lot of volunteers, and we'd have to have volunteer sort of like production directors, like the producer of the theater, and they would be volunteers. And so, they would say, you have to sit down and write a manifesto, and there would be grant writing, and you need that sort of mission statement and things like that. So we'd try to, sort of crystallize something, which wasn't always easy to do.
So from that 88-seat theater, then finally moved into Chicago in 80, which I realize is sort of the year I left Chicago. So there's things I don't remember. I think, did that really happen? And I think, I wasn't there. That's why it didn't happen. Yeah. So you moved it to the Jane Addams Center in 80, and then into the St. Nicholas space. And now you're at this amazing, and I'm turning to Martha here because Martha is the artistic director of this major cultural complex. How big's the budget?
Boy, that's something I'm supposed to have at the tip of my tongue, and I would say 12 million. Yeah, I mean, I'm not so...
Close enough.
Yeah.
Close enough. The price of one Broadway musical.
Yeah.
Yeah, it puts it in perspective, doesn't it? There are 3 theaters now.
Yes.
It's in a neighborhood that, when I was, working there, was a real rough neighborhood. It's very upscale now. Everything is boutique-y, and life has changed dramatically in these 30 years. Why did you decide to take it over? Was it a hard decision?
Oh, gosh, I didn't decide to take it over.
I mean, was it a hard decision to accept?
Oh, absolutely not. I am the recipient of incredible good fortune and chance. Gary Sinise, Jeff Perry, and Terry Kinney are founders. At the time that I was made artistic director, Randy Arty, my predecessor, I think had, Randy grew the theater tremendously in the time that he was there. He shepherded the company from this, 211-seat storefront theater on North Halsted through the process of building this 511-seat theater where we are now, which has subsequently grown to include 2 other theaters, a separate administrative office, a scene shop on the west side of Chicago. And Randy really spearheaded that movement. And of course, the fact of building the theater from the ground up required an entire institutional infrastructure, starting with a board of directors and funders and so forth. And I think that, the job that Randy accepted when he was artistic director is not the job that he left to his successor, much to his credit. I mean, he really built the theater. And I think at that point, Randy was just, kind of, he was done doing that job. He accomplished so much in getting the theater built. So the founders at that point reintroduced themselves into the process and into a relationship with the board and said, they were going to be instrumental in choosing the successor to Randy. And seriously, the great good fortune was that I had joined the company a couple of years before that. I was working with Randy as an artistic associate. And they, Gary, Jeff, and Terry bet on the fact of someone, me, who was familiar with the culture, not at all familiar with the tasks of being an artistic director. I was an actor.
You began there as a naked tribeswoman
yes.
in Savages.
Yes.
Yeah?
John Malkovich in 1981.
Sounds like Chicago, right?
Right. Directed a play called Savages by Christopher Hampton. And I had been taking classes with John for about the year before that. And I, along with a group of other, college students, donned full body makeup and became South American Indians in Christopher Hampton's play. But anyway, that's how I got introduced to the company. And Gary, Jeff, and Terry, in choosing a new artistic director, as I say, they chose to select someone who was familiar with the culture of Steppenwolf and with that way of doing things, and who came from an actor point of view.
But also, you have a PhD from Northwestern Performance Studies.
Right.
This was never a head-driven company.
Right.
This was a real gut-driven company. Not to say that they weren't, very intelligent people, but to have chosen someone who came also from academics is kind of brave.
Well, I think that I know that a big part of that was a member of the company, Frank Galati, who directed Lois very beautifully in Grapes of Wrath, which he adapted for the stage, is a member of the company and was before I was. Frank was a mentor of mine at Northwestern. He is a professor in the Department of Performance Studies. And I know that he was is a respected member of the company. And Gary, Jeff, and Terry, when they were choosing an artistic director, I know came to Frank and asked for his counsel. And Frank suggested, I know, suggested that they should consider me.
So how strange is it to have a woman the head of this supposedly male-driven aesthetic?
Linda, I think it's weird if, in fact, one has an impression of Steppenwolf in the mode that you described in your introduction, which is to say, a testosterone-driven, you know, very visceral, smash a beer can in your forehead style of acting. And I think that, you know, it's not unreasonable to suggest that that was sort of how Steppenwolf splashed into a kind of national consciousness with plays like True West and acting, you know, featuring John Malkovich, who's a very brash actor. But over the course of almost 30 years, obviously the work has become ever so much more nuanced and varied as the constituent artists grow in their own experiences, both at the theater and with in venues outside of the theater. So I think that, you know, in that sense, that the fact of me leading the company in the ways that you cited as different from the originals, both someone who comes at least from strong academic background and is a woman, is not so unusual, but rather a kind of flowering of the work and the sophistication of the theater. I also think it's much to the credit of the founders to be unafraid of introducing difference into play.
Lois Smith, now you were not with the original Steppenwolf.
No.
You knew about them.
Yes.
And Frank Galati came to you?
The theater called my agents. They needed a Ma Jode and didn't have one in there.
For the Grapes of
What
Wrath.
had started such a very young company, and to my great pleasure, they didn't have a Ma Jode. So I ended up going out to Chicago to meet them and audition for them.
That was 88 in Chicago 88. And then 90 on Broadway. Right?
88 in Chicago and 90 on Broadway, yes.
And then is it like Actors Equity, once you're in, are you in?
No.
Did you get your Steppenwolf card?
No, I did not. I worked with the company in 3 different productions of The Grapes of Wrath. We started at 88 in Chicago, ran a couple of months and worked on it pretty much all the time, and still knew there were a lot of things changing and to be done. At the end of that run, Frank knew, and everybody knew, that there was work to be done. Frank Galati, the director. There was also obviously a strong sense that this was going somewhere. This was going to have a future life. And there were many theaters coming to see it. And so, well, we got invited to London to an international festival. But it did mean putting it up again. And so about 9 months later, we rehearsed it again in Chicago, and then opened the season at La Jolla with the new version, and took it straight from there to London to an international festival, which was so exciting. And about 6 months after that, now that it had a London imprimatur, the various people who had wanted to bring it to New York were now joined by the Schuberts, who had the money in the theater to make it happen. So we had 5 Broadway producers, I believe, among them the Schuberts, and we came to Broadway in 90.
Yeah. And you were also in The Buried Child, the revival that came in.
Yes,
in
some
95.
years later. So when Gary asked me to read Buried Child, I was thinking about that as you were talking to Martha about the beginning sense of what the company was. And I had seen Buried Child in, I believe, 79, and had very vivid memories of parts of it, but I hadn't seen or read it again. And when Gary asked me to read it, and I read it, I was astonished about how much I didn't know, how much I did know, and read it many times. But I remember one of my earliest thoughts about it was, how am I going to manage, how do I enter this male play? And the first Steppenwolf play I ever saw was the True West, which they brought to New York. Anyway, it was a wonderful trip into Buried Child.
Yeah,
and,
we're
so
talking about the Sam Shepard play,
that, yes,
yet another strange Shepard
play.
idea about the family and American myth. When True West opened in New York, I was already here, and I had known Steppenwolf a little bit before I came. And I remember I had reviewed John Malkovich in Ashes, which I guess was a St. Nicholas production.
It was, yeah.
Into a theater that you later moved into. That,
Right, yeah.
But I knew about Laurie Metcalf had done this legendary Laura and Glass Menagerie, and I had some idea of the texture of what Steppenwolf was. And True West opened here, off-Broadway, another Sam Shepard play that had not done well in its first incarnation, opened here with Malkovich and Sinise in 76, no, I'm sorry, in 83, and I remember going there and looking at the program, and nowhere in the program or the bios did it say, these are from Chicago, these are people from Chicago, this is from a company called Steppenwolf. And I realized that there had been so many shows that had been imported from Chicago that had failed, that it was actually saying it was Chicago at that moment was a liability. And it wasn't until it was a huge success that suddenly they'd say, who are these guys? Who are these people? And then there were stories, and they say, oh, we come from this company in Chicago. And that's really how it started. I wish I still had the program, because I was so ambivalent about it, them not even being able to say where they came from. Because coming from Chicago, so many good shows from Chicago had come here and been disgraced and sent home. What about that? Must be an ongoing ambivalence about sort of the desire for external validation, and yet this suspicion of why should they be defining who we are? Is this still happening? It was very much happening when I was in Chicago in the 70s.
It probably happens still, Linda. I think that, there's no question that New York, in terms of American cities, remains the kind of, that is a final credentialing, I think, for very many people in terms of just national, international recognition.
It's louder here.
Yeah. But I think that there's also the concomitant sort of chauvinism about Chicago. There are ever so many, I think, actors, and probably a strain of Steppenwolf's sensibility has always been, we're where it's happening. In fact, I remember Gary telling some kind of story. He was talking to a producer about something, and this was early on, about bringing one of the shows, and this producer made the mistake of referring to Gary as Steppenwolf, or as Chicago being out there. And Gary just sort of shouting, "What do you mean out there? We're here!" And I think probably, and I'm sure that Steppenwolf has been a significant contributor to the fact of Chicago being recognized as a very, very rich environment for theater.
Yeah, it was Steppenwolf and the David Mamet and the Gregory Mosher things all sort of happening at the same time. Suddenly people were saying to me, "You were in Chicago in the 70s?" I said, "Well, yeah, we didn't even know it." But I also, then Anna Nightingale, Anna Nightingale sang. Joan Allen was in at Lincoln Center, which was also an enormous success. And then Balm and Gilead came, a revival of Lanford Wilson play, where Laurie Metcalf, did one of her, did this 20-minute thing about being a naive prostitute, and really you got to see a lot of the company in that. But I kept being annoyed that I don't remember it being rock and roll theater. And if I was annoyed with the company being identified that way and actually forced into that kind of a pigeonhole, I just wondered how the company felt about it.
Well, I know sometimes I've had thoughts where people go, "Oh, it was True West and Balm and Gilead," and it was like, well, Anna Nightingale sang was in there. But I think Martha's point was very well taken. The rock and roll, the big thing, True West was brilliant. I mean, it was a brilliant conception. It was brilliant casting. It rocked. I loved watching the play. I watched it many, many times myself. That's a big noise. When you do something that's quieter and subtler, it's more difficult to get the big cymbals going, and people respond to it in a different way. It's not as easy to write about. I mean, it's a subtler sort of experience. And I think it's a perfect example of there are many things going on within the company and always have been. There is this visceral rock and roll thing, but there's also a very lyrical, and from the early days, that's been there, a gorgeous production of Glass Menagerie in the first year or two. You know, it has both of those things operating. I think the governing principle was always just to do good work, interesting work, and do good writing. I think that the writing was always very, very important to the company. If the writing was good, whether it was a comedy or a Tennessee Williams or something that was really, really gutsy like Sam Shepard, I think there was room for all of that to coexist. And I just think that the quieter ones just don't get the kind of coverage, you know, out there in the way.
And also, it was defined from outside. It was defined by New York, which I found annoying. That the image was actually now this is what you are, Steppenwolf. Sort of the way the art movement from Chicago in the 60s and 70s came to New York and became the Chicago monster style and the Imagists, and they hadn't been calling themselves that at all.
Yeah. But I think that hasn't stopped anything. That didn't determine any of the choices that were made in terms of, you know, for the past 30 years of the kind of things, you know, and the play selections. It's been, you know, a brilliant, beautiful variety of work over the last 30 years.
Is there a Steppenwolf style?
You know, I get asked that a lot. And I think it's contained within what Joni is saying. And that is this. The Steppenwolf was unusual as a company because it was begun by actors. It sounds a pedestrian thought, but it remains unusual. The fact that, and the leadership of the theater has always come from the position of the actors. And Gary, Jeff, and Terry had a very big impulse in starting the theater was to empower the actor. This is the person who's shaking hands with the audience. This is the first and last word on all of the activity that goes into creating a production. These are the people who are doing 8 shows a week. So to really give that person a substantial force in not just the process of playmaking, but in the process of institutional building that happens around the playmaking is very significant. And I can say for myself as an actor, if I can go into various theaters and work as an actor and sense where the heartbeat of that theater is. There are places that feel very much, they are director's theater. This is a playwright's theater over here. I think when one comes into Steppenwolf, it's an actor's theater. There's a kind of care.
And so many of the actors are also directors, become directors.
And I think that's why they became directors, right, Jenny?
Yes.
Because we have to have someone who speaks the actor language.
Exactly. Yeah, I love when one of the first plays that Gary directed was all women. It was called Waiting for the Parade. I think it was the first play that he directed. A beautiful Canadian play about these 5, I think it was 4 or 5 women whose husbands were all off at the war, and it was how the women were dealing with being on their own during World War II. And, you know, it was funny and it was poignant, and that was the first play that Gary ever directed. So.
See, I find that irritating that people don't know that. You know,
here's their chance.
Here's
now everybody knows.
Here, now everyone knows. It's Women in Theater. You find out the first play he ever directed. Okay. Someone, actually it was Bruce Sagan, but people, you know, is he a board member now?
Yes, absolutely.
Was a theater patron for many, many years. Called Steppenwolf a national theater locally based. And I think that's good. Do you think about this as a national theater? I mean, Chicago's very possessive, so how do you do both?
Well, I think that there is a conscious. We're conscious of ourselves as a national theater. We're conscious of the fact that we have an international reputation, or that we are recognized internationally. It's very, very gratifying to learn from our colleagues in London or in Ireland, both of which places we have brought productions, but to know that they have a sense of what Steppenwolf is, or recognize our artists, or recognize our production history. It's very exciting.
How many people are actual Steppenwolf members now?
35.
35. From the original 7 then, right? And 7, then 9. Yeah.
And there's only a couple that, H.E. Bacchus and Nancy. Oh my God, this is terrible.
That's
Blanking on
okay.
her last name, but everybody else. Sort of.
All the original people are still considered members.
Yes.
And many are still coming back to do work there. I know John Mahoney from Frasier, I'm sorry, but you know, John Mahoney is a Steppenwolf player, and a lot of people come back and do work. Did you want to?
I haven't done a play for quite a while, but
Yes,
if I do, I'll be doing it there.
The people, something about Chicago theater that I've always noticed from afar now is the loyalty. That David Mamet has been loyal to the people that he was working with there almost forever. You know, I'll see a movie of his and there will be somebody composing the music that he had used years ago, and he'd say, well, to me, you know, Rocco's time will come. And, you know, and I feel that with Steppenwolf also, that there's such a strong sense of a home base and sticking with your own, even though you go out and don't theoretically resent one another's success. But I think, was it hard at the beginning when some people were getting recognized, when this was supposed to be this ensemble?
Well, I can sort of speak to that. I mean, it was, I think one of the reasons that it exists that way, though, is Chicago does not have a film and television industry within the city like New York and Los Angeles does, and particularly Los Angeles, because the TV industry is not so big in New York now. There are very few television shows that are made here. But in Chicago, it was non-existent. I mean, films obviously come in and shoot and hire people on a basis, but the center of operations is not in Chicago. As a result, there wasn't a lot of pulling people, like saying, say they saw the Chicago production of True West and they said to John, well, you know, come and be, you know, audition for this movie or be in this play. You know, that didn't exist for the first several years that the company was together. Also, the initial idea behind the company is that the people did not want to strike out on their own and have to knock on doors and prove themselves. They wanted to create a home where they had control, they knew what they were going to do. So I think some of that was the temperament that when Laurie and Terry, and they gravitated towards each other when they were in college, because they knew they didn't want to do that thing where they were going out on their own in their picture and stick it under the door and all this. They wanted security, they wanted their own sense of control and sense of home. And so I think that makes, you know, that really makes a big difference, is the initial idea.
But you know, some of those members who were around at the time when Steppenwolf first made its forays into different arena, and that would include here at New York with True West, you know, they will say it was a very much a contested decision. And Gary will explain that he knew that if he didn't open the doors up and look for the opportunities for our actors to work elsewhere, that would be fractious to the company, that these were people with tremendous amount of talent and ambition. And he was trying to create a situation just by feeling his way where those people were going to go with the blessings of the company. There were members of the company who felt very strongly that it was the beginning of the end, you know, and talk about the democratic process. I mean,
exactly.
Locked in a small room, chairs a-flying, you know.
Yeah, people were very conflicted about it. And it was a year or two at least of, you know, growing pains, and is this the right thing or the wrong thing to be doing. Ultimately, he made the most brilliant, correct choice, because I personally feel that the theater the chances of it not being in existence now are greater had that not happened than vice versa, because it was another growth spurt, and then it's brought in all these other wonderful people that we've become associated with in other venues, and had other experiences that we bring back to the theater. I mean, it was the healthiest thing to do.
Well, really, what interests me also is how many of the people from Steppenwolf and you, as a newer member of Steppenwolf, relatively newer, came from relatively small towns in Illinois, and you were raised in Topeka, Kansas.
I was born in Kansas.
Born in Kansas.
So was I, Lois.
You were born in Kansas. You were raised in Detroit, though. That's big city business where we were. Yeah, but still, definitely not the kind of people whose parents took them to Broadway shows and the ballet their whole lives. So there's also that kind of energy of the self-taught, you know, of the self-motivated, at least at the beginning. And looking at your amazing career, that you made your film debut in East of Eden.
Yes, that was my first film.
So I mean, to have gone from James Dean is it not perfect to then end up and be a Steppenwolf actor?
It's perfect.
You know, it is perfect. So. And then 5 Easy Pieces with Jack Nicholson, his sister. You were his sister.
Yes.
So always, it seems to me that you were seeking out this kind of visceral kind of entertainment.
I was very fortunate to be part of those things. My family moved to the West Coast. I lived in Seattle, but I came from Seattle to New York to start being an actor, and within the first few years I had done a play on Broadway. At that time there was a lot of television in New York, lots. Yeah. And I started to do live television in New York. You mentioned we're generational. In my generation, the television was live when I started. Isn't that hard to believe? Yeah. I mean, that's
exciting.
It's exciting. Oh, it was exciting. Except you didn't know how exciting it was because that was the way it was.
Right.
It wasn't compared to anything else. And then I did a film, East of Eden, within, I guess, the first 2 or 3 seasons that I was in New York. So I had a wonderful start. And then how many years later, when Steppenwolf called, what a treat.
It's a perfect match, isn't it? It's a wonderful match, I would
And when
think.
I was first there, listening to Joan talk about the early days, I began to hear those stories. I didn't know a lot about its history. I had seen by now, I'd seen them and was mightily impressed. But I began to hear the stories about how it happened that the first productions were taken away, and the tension within the company about that, and the wonderment that I felt that it existed. All the things Martha's talked about, that it was an actor's theater, and the actors made it, went through these terrible tearing up things, which you would think would have torn them apart, and then didn't, and that here it still existed, stronger than ever, with the same people, and with actors. I fell in love, you know, with this company. I was very fortunate to be there.
I mean, of the number of stories I've read, even written, about, you know, will success spoil Steppenwolf, and then is success spoiling Steppenwolf, and then, you know, is Steppenwolf having an identity crisis? You know, I mean, you've been having an identity crisis since the first day, right?
Yeah.
In public.
Yeah. Would you like to talk about the current identity crisis a bit?
Gosh. My feeling, Linda, you know, and is that an institution, if it grows out of something authentic, if it truly is representative of the artists, in other words, if that remains the feeding life of the institution, ultimately the institutional life will mirror that in an individual's life. So, you know, when the company began, it was begun by people who were in their 20s, the leadership of which was male. So that was the energy. Over time, the company has grown. The gender balance has evened somewhat. We've been tempered by experiences, artistic experiences elsewhere. Many of us have become parents. We've had relationships. We're taking care of our own, in some cases, aging parents. And the institution, I think, has mirrored some of those impulses as well. We have a very flourishing arts education program. Our subscribership is wide. We have these 3 performance spaces. There are kind of different demographics in each of them. And we sort of center the writing differently in each of those venues. So just as an individual becomes sort of more complex, I think the institution has as well. And one of, I think, the great responsibilities that we feel is to be, as you said, you know, when you cited Chicago, a good citizen of Chicago, a representative, a player on the cultural landscape there in a way that's generous and that looks to smaller companies and younger artists and, as I say, the educational effort. So, I mean, I very much think that the institution, whatever its identity is, mirrors the people who are comprising it.
Does that become a problem? Is there some, you know, you were the hip young company. You know, I was a young critic.
Surprisingly, we all get old.
We're the only hip company now. We're still hip, though.
I was a young critic, right? You know, with the pressure now, I know newspapers are under so much pressure because they don't have young audiences. The readership is so down on newspapers. A lot of the commercial theater is crying because, and even the off-Broadway theater, the nonprofit theater, because the audience is aging so. Does Steppenwolf think about this? It shouldn't.
Every performing arts organization thinks about that. Theater and any of the, you know, symphonies, dance. And fortunately, as I said, with 3 theaters, particularly, let's say, our Garage Theater, which is an 80-seat venue, we do new writing in there, we work with new artists. The demographics of that audience are younger. They're more culturally diverse than, let's say, our subscriber audience.
The ticket prices are less.
Yeah,
exactly.
It costs $15 to go to the theater. But I'll tell you something. I am very enthusiastic about the rich mix of people who come to Steppenwolf. And I also think sometimes, you know, those of us who are concerned about such things say, well, gosh, you know, if the audience is graying, won't they ultimately disappear? I wonder sometimes if theater isn't an activity, a cultural engagement that may just attract people as they gain maturity. I mean, there's certainly, there's theater that is kind of geared toward younger audiences. But what does theater require? I mean, it requires a willingness to sit with the word, to be in play with the metaphor, to be interpretive. And those are activities, I think, that we get as we, just as human beings, mature in our sensibilities. So it doesn't surprise me.
I read something that you said, if you did say it, that you think that the future of Steppenwolf is in something called virtual media.
No.
Oh, good.
Oh, my goodness, no.
I actually felt a chill, you know? I thought...
No. Actually, on the contrary, I think the great gold of Steppenwolf, of any live theater, is that so much of the popular entertainment is becoming based on virtual experiences. Yeah. And I think, you know, the very thing that some people think damns theater is, I think, its richness and it's the base of its endurance, which is we huddle around the campfire and we tell each other stories. It's been going on since time memorial. I think it's a human need. I think we want to do it in community with other people. And it's not, you know, we're not speaking to 1 million people on a night, we're speaking to 500 people. Yeah. And to me, that's a really beautiful experience.
And it's also homemade, and it goes at its own pace, and you know, you can't fast forward it if you want to. You just have to go there and take its rhythms in as your own. What is Pure Arts?
Pure Arts.
Pure Arts. You have some arrangement with a
we no longer do, actually.
Pure, all right.
Tim Evans is the producer of Steppenwolf Films. He's a member of our staff. Tim has been with us for Joan,
forever.
Yeah, forever. In various capacities. Yes. And some years ago, kind of led by our founders, was an effort to begin a foray into investigating Steppenwolf-produced films. And there are currently, I believe, 5 projects that are under development, and we hope that one of them will come to fruition within the year. And Tim has been doing that. For a while, he was in partnership with a group of people, representatives called Pure Arts in Los Angeles, and that relationship is no longer. Okay.
But you do have a wing that explores making movies. I keep looking at Joan Allen, and I keep seeing Heidi. After after you...
We're talking Lederhosen.
But I know. Heidi, as in Heidi Chronicles. Heidi, when demographics in the theater, Joan Allen was in Heidi Chronicles, which was Wendy Wasserstein's play that I believe was the first time a woman ever won a Pulitzer Prize.
I think so. I think it was.
And also, it was, for me, it was the first play that actually did the big chill thing that all the big chill events didn't for me, which is use what we had been through in the 60s and 70s and through the eyes of a woman, Heidi, who as Wendy Wasserstein has said, who gets sad.
Yes.
Don't you want to, that's a real selling point now, don't you think? Yeah. Don't you think,
They'll be lining up to invest in that.
Exactly.
A woman who gets sad.
Woman gets sad, exclamation point. No, that'll be really good on, but it was such a wonderful play.
Beautiful
and
play.
And a wonderful performance. And then you went on to do another play I loved, which is the Marriage of Bette and Boo.
Yeah, I did that before.
Oh, that was
actually.
before.
I
Sorry.
did. Yeah.
Okay, I
did
loved it anyway.
a great play as well.
Christopher Durang
Christopher
play.
Durang, brilliant play.
You know, so
Masterpiece.
dry and evil and so really.
Really, just a fantastic, brilliant play. His masterpiece. I believe.
actually think that it's one of the great American family dramas.
I'm totally in agreement.
And since, I forget which is the last play that you've done, but you really haven't gone back. You're in movies. You do movies wonderfully.
Yeah, a lot of films. Yeah.
Of course, you got a. Oh, but before that, you had a Tony Award. Let's do this. I have to do the award thing for Burn This with John Malkovich on Broadway. Okay. Then there you were. What, linear? Women aren't supposed to be linear,
no,
right?
Not. We think all
right. We're not supposed to be linear. So Pat Nixon in Oliver Stone's movie.
Mm-hmm.
So many really, really strong women that you have been able to play in movies, which ordinarily, I think, so many of these would have just been seen as wives. Mm-hmm. You know, how did you escape just the wife role?
I don't know. I've always thought of myself as a character actress, and I think I am one. And so a lot of the theater that I had done, you know, was all sort of based on that and doing a variety of things. You know, film, it's a little more, you know, you have to kind of zero in on a type a little bit, you know. I think of them as, you know, I did them all incredibly close together. I did Nixon, The Crucible, and The Ice Storm within the period of a year and a half.
Wow.
And they were boom, boom, boom. And then in retrospect, you know, it was sort of, well, you know, I was, you know, John Proctor's wife, and I was Richard Nixon's wife. And I think, you know, I did not see them as similar at all, you know, and when I was doing them, because I thought one is from 400 years ago, one's from lived in the White House, you know, but I do think there is a thread sort of strength. You know, people would call the moral center. You're playing the moral center of the piece for whatever reason.
Is that your type, Joni?
I am. That's what I want everybody to remember.
Yeah, I'm the moral center.
I'm the moral center, always.
I'm the one who got sad. Can we just name us? No, Born Conspiracy is just coming out of...
Born Supremacy.
Supremacy. Mm-hmm. Sorry. There you are playing a CIA agent. Mm-hmm. How much fun was that?
It was fun. It was a lot harder it was one of the hardest roles I've ever done, I have to say. And surprisingly so. I thought it would be a lot simpler, but the language is very specific, and it's very directives and just saying uplink that, downlink that, check the police records, and it was very unemotional language, and it was really difficult to memorize as a result, and it really made me kind of go, oh, I need emotional cues in order to know what I'm saying next. It was really, it was quite a challenging experience, though. It was.
You both have daughters. Do you have children?
I do not.
Yeah. How did you manage to have a life, make children? This is something that's always fascinating to me because I think it's hard enough just to get through the day oneself.
Well, I had one daughter, and my daughter has 3 children, and I look with amazement when I'm there. One is a lot different from 3. It really is. So I would say That's how.
You make one and let them
that,
do it.
of course, is not a real answer. I know actors who have big families, and I guess it's maybe not so common, but also geography gets to be a matter when one is an actor. You tend not to be doing something in one place all the time. Of course, again, Steppenwolf started out in one place and stayed there for a good time and is still there. But the company is now spread across the country and even outside of it.
But did your daughter travel with you then when she was?
When she was a very tiny person in a bag.
Little bag baby.
Her name is Moon.
Her name is Moon.
Her name is Moon.
Oh.
Yes, and she became a midwife. How's that for a name?
That's good.
Yes, she traveled with me as a baby, and then when she was in school, then of course immediately that becomes, she has her own place she needs to be, so that's, changes.
And Sadie Friedman is how old now?
10.
10. And lives in New York. She's a New York kid.
She's a New York kid.
And your husband, Peter Friedman, also a wonderful actor that was your co-star in Anne Nightingale Sang, and also in...
And he's in 12 Angry Men
and
right
he's
now
now in
which
12
is
Angry
so
Men.
Wonderful. Everybody
It's-
should go see that.
Yeah,
He's fantastic in the whole
I
play.
was
It's
wondering
great.
when you look at him in 12 Angry Men if you don't think, yeah, I want to do that again. Because that's a kind of acting.
Yeah, it is. Well, I think for me, I think becoming a parent changed my my ability or desire maybe to do theater as much. As strange as it sounds, because film work takes you away and the hours are insane, they're 12, 14-hour days, etc. But it is a limited period of time. You do it and then you maybe salt your money away and then you don't work for 6 or 8 months and then you can be a full-time mom as well. Plus theater I think is very deceptive, at least it was for me. It would never leave my mind. I don't know your experience. Whether, even though you're only doing it for the, that 2-hour time span in the evening, I would find my whole day is based, do you guys find that as well? You're thinking at 8 in the morning, okay, well now I'm getting up, now I'm going to eat breakfast, now I'm going to rest, now I'm going to do this. And your whole day is geared about what you're doing that night. And do you feel
Yes,
that's the same thing?
it creates its rhythm when you're in a play. Yes, it has it's the center, and
Even though you're actually only executing it at night, it never leaves your consciousness or your decisions about how you conduct your day. It's very consuming that way.
And also theater has the rehearsal period, which is so consuming and is usually all day long. And then there's depending on the nature of there's tech and previews, and that's just madness. Very long hours, very intense. Nothing else can even get in. And then it settles into a run if it does. So that's also so it's very unknown, the theater, it seems to me, it's not one thing. Each time you do it, it has this series of
Exactly, yeah.
and then if it's a play at Steppenwolf, it usually will run a couple of months. And then the commercial productions may run one night, they may run 3 years, not so very often anymore, but it's a very peculiar, unstable beast in terms of timing.
With Steppenwolf now, do you have, what are your hopes for it in the next, do you have to think 3-year plans and the stuff that you didn't have to think when you were doing daily manifestos?
My hope for Steppenwolf is that we continue to be an ensemble, that our artists will, when they're able, come back and work at the theater as artists. My hope is that we will enrich our process. I mean, right now, one of the things that I think very strongly about, and I'm in conversation with all the sort of stakeholders in the theater, is for us to interrogate the notion of growth. What does it mean to go on? And to me, it can't simply mean grow the institution. And I feel like we're engaged in the process right now of how do we make ourselves richer? How do we gain texture? How do we make it a better place for artists? And in a more fluid, useful conversation with our community. How does that happen? And, that has certain ramifications that are pragmatic. Are our buildings the appropriate ones are, you know, and we're doing a lot of sort of investigating and experimenting in the way that we format our programming. And I just want it to remain a very vivid, lively place.
And is the rock and roll theater a burden, or are you past it?
I think probably we're past it. I mean, when people invoke it, it's just a shorthand for something else, and the conversation can kind of quickly steer. I love your example, Joni, that the first play that Gary Sinise, you know, who's sort of the, if anyone who's leading the charge on the rock and roll masculine energy, directed a bunch of women in a play that is very delicate.
Very delicate, yeah.
Del Close, another Chicago character. It grows them, right? Del Close, an actor, when he died, gave his skull, donated his skull to the Goodman Theater so they could use it in Hamlet. He said that New York and Los Angeles are marketplaces and Chicago's a laboratory. Oversimplification?
Let me speak from the chauvinistic Chicago point of view, who would value a laboratory more highly than the marketplace. Yes, accurate description. No, I mean, I think it's one reason why Chicago gives birth to so many young companies and young artists, why people are attracted there, because there is a sense that one can learn one's craft there.
Absolutely. When young actors ask me about, you know, starting out, yada, yada, I always say, you know, consider going to Chicago because it's rich, there's a lot of opportunity. Call the Equity Hotline, because the best teacher, certainly was for me, was doing it over and over and over and over again. And I had the great good fortune to do it with incredibly talented people in a wonderful environment and just succeed, fail, kind of do okay, do all sorts of things. And Chicago as a city provides that. And so I often recommend, say, if you want to do, you should do, and do, you know, there is a great place.
And there are always these little seedlings coming up. So, you know, you're the old institutions now. Part of.
We're still hip, though.
So sorry. You're hip, you're young, honestly.
She's hitting us with this whole thing.
I mean hip institution, right? This is a show about women in theater, and we only have a few minutes left. So I just was going to ask you a question that sometimes I ask the guests. And if you right now could snap your fingers and change anything about women in theater, is there, what would you do for women? And if you think it's irrelevant, that's great.
Well, probably, I would like to see the work of women writers and directors, since they tend to have, the productions bear a great deal of signature from a writer or a director, you know, as they can from actors. But it would be great to see that playing field even up a bit.
Yeah, I'm there with Martha, because if I think of the list, you know, of plays and films that I've done about 25 of each, and I've only really worked with 2 women directors, one in a film, and that was just a year ago. And then, and then the wonderful Suzanne Shepard, who directed A Lesson from Aloes at Steppenwolf. And, you know, and I've had great experiences with men, but I totally am with Martha that there are just more women writers and more women directors.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the surveys come out, and there are supposedly just as many women directors and playwrights, but they just don't get hired. Does any of this resonate with you at all?
Oh, of course. I too have had such a few women directors. Women playwrights, it seems to me, it is getting to be more. Now there are more. Well, maybe some of them are just that I do more readings of their plays, because I do more readings of plays than productions. God knows, in the last 30 years, that's the play reading has become, as I sometimes call it, in lieu of theater. For all of us, whatever our gender, what I wish is that it costs so much to produce, it costs so much to buy a ticket, and as far as I'm concerned, that's the sorriest part of theater. It's so limiting to finding its audience, to increasing its audience and increasing the number of productions. And it just, that shrinkage, which I've experienced in my little lifetime, is a sorry thing, and it makes me sad.
Well, women get sad. No.
But
this was actually, I'm afraid we're out of time. So on that, I have to say that, you know, that some things may be sad, but it's been really inspirational for me. Joan Allen, Martha Lavey, and Lois Smith, thank you so much for being here. And thank you for being here. On behalf of the League of Professional Theater Women, I'm Linda Weiner, and this has been Women in Theater.